because I'm really happy. I haven't seen it yet, so I don't have a review on it or anything. I'm sure we'll talk about it a lot on Monday on the radio show with Jim Norton. But I'm really, really looking forward to seeing it. I'm really glad that it's finally coming out. I mean, this was a project, the Patrice O'Neal documentary is something that's been talked about literally for years in terms of it not only getting done, but getting done right and having the right people involved and everything. And I mean, based on the people that I know that have seen it and based on the people that I know that are involved, my expectations are pretty high. And, I'm really glad that it's coming out because it'll just hopefully increase the conversation about Patrice O'Neal. And that's something that I think that you have to remind people to do every couple years, that there are certain people that we have to continue talking about. When Patrice first passed, of course, there was all this conversation about him. And then, maybe right after, people finding him for the first time. But I think it's important to remind and remind and remind, especially when you've got somebody who's of the genius level of a Patrice O'Neal. I really, every year as I get older, I appreciate more and kind of can't believe in my head more how much time I actually got to spend with this guy. And I'm not going to sit here like I was one of his best friends, but, when I was working for Opie and Anthony, he was on a lot. And, I would, every day, hot dog, because Patrice was the biggest wrestling fan in the world. He wrote for WWE for like 3 days before Stephanie McMahon had to fire him 4 times in a row sitting on a plane. But he wrote for like 3 days because he was such a super fan, and he watched every single week. He watched Raw every week, and every time he would come in, he would walk in, always mid-show. He would do this thing, right, where he would walk in mid-show, and I'd be sitting in the studio at that point, pulling stuff up on Google, doing the Young Jamie thing that he does on Rogan, except
Pull that up.
Yeah, except Young Jamie actually does it really well. And I did it really, really
You were
poor.
awful.
I
remember.
But except I think that I was awful almost in a spiteful way. Like, it was like, are you trying to be bad at this? Like, I was really bad. It was not the right position for me to be in by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not the greatest team player in the world, okay?
Yeah. But you moved on to now criticizing, the producers when, Troy or whoever else from them getting it wrong.
Exactly.
You're above that now.
Exactly. I did it wrong, so now I can complain about other people doing it wrong. It's the cycle of life. But Patrice would come in, and he'd come in like kind of as the show was already happening. And he would go, he's the only person I've ever known that would do this. Instead of like extending his hand for a handshake or not acknowledging you at all or patting you on the back or dapping you up or something like that, Patrice would stick his finger at you. Almost like how like royalty would stick their hand out so you would hold their hand and kiss it. Patrice would just kind of, as if it were nothing, like Orange Cassidy, like with no effort, just point his index finger to you, to me anyway. And I would just shake his finger as he sat down. There's something very, very prison-y about it. I don't know what it was. It was like, yes, sir. Yep. I don't know how many cigarettes I cost, but you are now the prized owner of a young Sam Roberts.
That was a little regal. I like it.
It was good. And he's the only one that could get away with it. Like, if anybody else had come in there and stuck their finger out, I'd be like, not that I have any clout at this point, but what are you doing? Like, this is dumb. And then the other thing he would do every single time he would come in is we'd do the first break or whatever. Commercial break would happen, and guys would go to the bathroom or whatever. Every time he would come in, he'd wait for the commercial break, and he'd look at me, and he'd go, "Man, wrestling stinks." and he would sit there with his list of complaints about everything they were doing wrong in WWE, and he was right. He was always right about it. He wanted jobbers to come back. I mean, this was before even like the Braun Strowman run where they actually did bring jobbers back, and they made James Ellsworth a star and everything. When they did that, I was like, that was Patrice's thing. He really wanted jobbers to come back.
One of my favorite stories of Patrice is him explaining how Stephanie fired him 3 times.
Oh my
I love
God.
that story.
He's just sitting there on the airplane. And she's like, we need you this weekend. And he, at this point, already realizes that, I mean, like, this guy, sometimes it's just, I'm not going to work on this team. Like, this isn't going to work out. Like, Patrice isn't going to sit there and, being a writer for WWE is not a job that Patrice should have, right? So he knew this.
Right.
He knew this pretty quickly.
It's a very yes, sir job.
Right. And that's not, Patrice will never say those 2 words in a row. Like, it just won't happen. So Stephanie's like, well, we're going to need you in this weekend, to write Raw. And he's like, I got stand-up this weekend, so I can't. She's like, oh, I mean, okay, well, we need you because you're on the writing team now, so we are actually going to need you. And he's like, yeah. No, I won't be there. She's like, well, we need you to be there. And he's like, but I won't. But I need to not be there. I need to do stand-up, so that's where I'll be.
I'm telling you.
I'm not going to be there. And she's like, well, then we may have to let you go then. And he's like, all right. And she's like, so we're letting you go. You're fired. He's like, right.
Mm-hmm.
She's like, no, you don't. Like, we're firing you for not showing up this weekend. He's like, yeah. And it's just like, yeah, and like it's just these 2 forces diametrically opposed coming at each other. But I mean, man, I love him so much, and yeah, I'm so glad that the conversation is going to continue, and hopefully it kind of gets a whole new generation talking about him. Although, yeah, and people always go like, oh, what would he have thought of 2020? And it's like, man, I don't know what he would have thought of 2020. He would have had to see 2019 and 2018 and 2017 and 2016. Like, there were a bunch of, who knows? By the way, if anybody could answer that question, what would Patrice think of what's going on right now? If you can answer that question, then Patrice wouldn't have been so special. That what made Patrice so great is that you didn't sit there. Like, there are a lot of people who I can sit there and go like, okay, we'll have them on the show and we'll ask them about this because they'll say that. You haven't asked them before. Right. You haven't had the conversation, but you just know, okay, this is how they'll respond, and that'll be fun. So that's what we'll do. With Patrice, it always really was. I don't know what his take on this is going to be, but it's going to
be a good one.
It's going to be great, and it's going to be true, and he's going to convince us. Like, you're going to be won over by it. Yesterday. No, it was this morning. It was this morning. I was driving around, and I put on the Apple Music, I put on like some like 90s rock playlist or whatever, just something real quick, just because I was driving, I didn't want to think about it. And like Everlong by the Foo Fighters come on, and I'm like, yeah, this is my shit. I love this. And I think Wonderwall by Oasis, I was like, yeah, this is great. And then Creep comes on, and I'm like, oh man, I love this song. And I can't listen to this song without thinking, and the YouTube video is classic. You can look it up. It's Patrice on some other radio show. And Patrice is sitting there breaking down how for some reason white people just have this relationship with the song Creep because of how we just love to hate ourselves, because of how bad our self-esteem is. Like, we all just need to be a creep. We all have this thing. And I'm like, oh my God. And I'm sitting there going like, I just listened to Everlong and I loved it. And I'm just sitting there going like Everlong is a song about how things are really good right now, but I don't know if they'll ever be this good again. It's like negative. And like Wonderwall is not like this song about how great everything is, right? It's these like, even when they're songs about love, they're still kind of heartbreaking. And then Creep comes on and I'm like, God damn it, he was right. he was right. Like, I do. I just, like, I'm like, why do I have this thing on a Friday morning where I want to fall into self-loathing? Just like, it just makes me comfortable. I want to put on some tunes and just start self-loathing for a while. It just makes me feel better. And I'm like, he called this one out too. And as the years go on, I mean, thank God that he hit just at the time, like Tough Crowd and all the stuff he did on O&A and all the stand-up and all the stuff he did on all the other radio shows where it's like, if that stuff had happened any earlier, you would have had to dig through tape and try to find old stuff, but it was just at the beginning of kind of digital recording and everything. So everything ends up on YouTube. I was watching I didn't watch the whole thing, but I was watching like a 12-hour YouTube video of the best of Patrice on Tough Crowd. And it was one of those where you put it into your watch later list on YouTube just because at any point in any day, if you have 5 minutes free, you just click it on, and it's going to be amazing.
That's how I discovered you guys. Discovered you guys on YouTube, listening. So like I would wait until the show was over, like around 10, and then I would know, okay, like at 11 o'clock, I'll just go there and listen to you guys, and then it was just like Patrice and Bill Burr and all those comics. It was amazing.
Amazing.
It was right around that time. Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. And you just look back, and you wonder because Patrice was kind of evolving at the end of his life. Like he was kind of, the whole sort of stereotypical explanation of Patrice that people have, even if they didn't really know him, was like, oh, he was a great guy, but he got in his own way and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, before he died, he was kind of going back and didn't really like being mean as much anymore and didn't like that people had their feelings hurt. I don't think he ever intended to hurt feelings. He just put his comedy in front of the awareness of the way people took it. The way people took it was secondary to getting the thought out, which I think is how you find the purest comedy, but it's also not how you build the best interpersonal relationships. And I think he'd become aware of that at the end of his life. So I don't know, man. It would have been really, really interesting, but I definitely think it's required viewing for the weekend for sure. I have to. You're going to watch it, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.